In this video, we're going to be reviewing the FN 510 Tactical. For many decades, the Glock 20 and 29, which you see on the table here, were the standard for 10mm outdoor carry. I previously reviewed a number of years ago the FN 509, which was the smaller 9mm version, and at the time I really wasn't that impressed by the trigger and the price and kind of the blocky grips and things of that nature. So as a result of that, I've kind of stayed away from FNs for a while until recently. Now, in January 2023, FN released the 510, which is the 10mm version of this handgun, as well as the 545, which basically is the 45 ACP version of the same handgun. So it's the exact same size. The difference is they have two caliber type options, 10mm as well as 45 ACP. And when you look at this aesthetically, it looks very similar to a 509. In fact, if you were to see them in a case together in a gun store, you probably think this is just a little bit bigger version than the 509, and it really kind of is. But if you like the looks of a 509, which a lot of people do, it really is a beautiful handgun. Now, there are two types of variants that are currently sold for the 510. The base model is the 510 MRD, and that is basically the version that comes with two 15-round magazines, basically the base version of this. You also have the upgraded version, which you see here on the table, which is the 510 Tactical. Now, the addition with the Tactical is it includes now a rear sight shroud that comes off the optics mounting plate. You have a threaded barrel. You have tritium night sights, both on the front as well as the rear, and then instead of 15-round magazines, it comes with a 15 as well as a 20-round magazine, which I'll show in a moment. Both versions you can buy in both flat dark earth, which you see here, as well as black. And both have optics cuts, so if you want to run an optic on here, you can. And they both come with suppressor level sights. The difference is whether you want the tritium on the Tactical as opposed to the blacked out on the base version. So those are the two main differences you're going to notice when you see the two. Now, real quickly, let's look at the weight. How does the weight of the FN come in? A lot of 10mm people are asking these questions around this. So if I look at this fully unloaded, it comes in around 1 pound 12 ounces. Fully loaded with a 15-round magazine comes in at 2 pounds 9 ounces. Now let's compare that, for example, to a Glock 20, which comes in at 1 pound 12 ounces and fully loaded with a 15-round magazine, which actually I'm 1 round short of this, comes in at the identical weight. So basically, you don't have any weight differences between a Glock 20 and an FN. However, for example, if you have a Glock 29, which is a smaller version, these come in at 1 pound 8.5 ounces fully loaded. Ounces, of course, that's only with 10 rounds as opposed to 15 rounds. So do you gain anything in weight or any weight difference between the FN and the Glock? No. The Glock 20 and the FN weigh in the same. And we'll talk about some of the differences between the two here in a moment. Now, looking real quickly at some of the features on here, you're going to notice that it comes with a Cerakote on here. In this case, it is Cerakoted with flat dark earth, or you can do black finish as well. It has both front and back serrations on the slides. It comes with steel suppressor type sights with tritium 3 dots on here, with a more pronounced front tritium dot over the rear dots. So that's what I prefer to shoot anyways. And again, these are suppressor height sights, so you can run a suppressor without having to change out your sights. It also has an optic cut with, as I mentioned before, a rear sight shroud, which actually looks kind of cool from the side. But once you take off the plate, the shroud comes off with that. It is a striker fired handgun, similar to what you would see in a 9mm. By the way, all my guns were safety checked prior to the video. And then the other thing you're going to notice about this is it comes with a hammer forged barrel. It is a 4.71-inch hammer forged barrel, as well as comes with a polished feed ramp straight out of the factory. Now, a lot of times I end up doing this on my handguns that I buy, or especially my 1911s. This already came with a polished feed ramp. So again, a nice little feature by FN. Now, looking real quickly at the frame, it is a polymer flat dark earth frame, kind of matching up to the slide. It comes with a 1913 rail mount. The serialization of the gun is at a plate at the middle of the 1913 rail. It is a true ambi gun as far as slide release as well as mag controls. So not only do you have a slide release on both sides, but you also have a mag release on both sides as well. So instead of, for example, a Glock where you would have to switch this back and forth, whether you want it right side, left side, it comes fully ambi on here, so you can push either one to activate it. You'll also notice on here it has a recessed trigger guard into the grip, which is a nice little feature, especially if you're trying to get a very comfortable grip. It also has a takedown, flip down lever, so which is typically you would see in a lot of different types of handguns in the marketplace today, and I'll show you that in a moment once we do the takedown. It has a FN hinged type trigger, so the safety block is, the safety is right here, so you have to push on the bottom of the trigger in order for it to activate and move forward. Now, whether you like these or not, this is what comes with this, with the FNs. Now, the difference with this one compared to, for example, the old 509 that I reviewed, is this one actually has a really nice trigger. The brake on this trigger, the take up is clean, and the brake on my Lyman gauge comes in around 4 pounds, which is basically where I would want a striker fired handgun to be at. And then the reset is nice and crisp and audible as well. So again, nice cleanup that FN is made on their trigger, whether you like the hinged or not. That's what comes with the gun, but it does have a nice break to it now, nice reset, a lot less gritty than what I used to see on the 509. You also have backstrap options on this gun. This one comes stock with a medium backstrap. Now, I've got average size hands, so this backstrap just fits my hand perfectly. I haven't even tried the smaller or the larger backstrap because, quite honestly, this just feels perfect for me. So if you've got an average size hand or things of that nature, you'll probably just want to go with the backstraps that are included. If you have larger hands, of course, they have bigger backstraps, etc. The other thing you're going to notice on the backstraps here is they also come with a small cup for a lanyard loop as well, so you have that. The other thing you're going to notice about this, it has a 1911 style grip angle, so you don't see that ridiculous Glock hump like you see on a Glock 20, which I always had to compensate for. So again, out of the box, the natural point of aim for this gun is just perfect because, again, it has a correct grip angle compared to, for example, a Glock 20. Now, the only other thing you're going to not see on here is a manual safety. Now, according to their website, they offer a manual safety model. I haven't seen any of these in the stores. At the time of filming, at least, they might change this over time, but they indicated that at some point there will be, if there is one already, there will be a manual safety option in here as well. So if you're one of those people that want a manual safety on this type of a platform, apparently it will be there. I just haven't seen it on the stores yet. Now, when you buy the Tactical, it comes in a bag, an FN bag, and then it comes with your extra magazine and, of course, all the other, plate mounts and things of that nature you would typically see on an optic system. But you're going to see that it comes with a 15-round as well as a 20-round magazine. And the 20-round magazine sticks out pretty far down the gun, but it is a pretty kind of a cool option here. So you basically have a full loadout with the 2 magazines that come with it of 35 rounds. Now, if you need more than that, the 10 millimeter, that's up to you. You can answer that question on your own. As I typically recommend, when you buy a handgun, you typically need 5 magazines with the handgun. So I've already purchased a couple with this as well, a couple additional 15s, one more 20, etc. Now, the thing about these magazines are they're high polished and they're metal and they're really good quality, but they're not cheap. These are FNs. So these magazines typically come in around anywhere from 50 to 60 bucks or even $65, depending upon where you're buying it. They're not cheap. So just remember, you're only getting 2 of these with this handgun, but at the same time, you typically, what my recommendation is, you're going to need to buy a few more to get to that 5 magazines that you typically would want when you buy a handgun. Now, as far as takedown, I want to show you just real quickly the takedown of this gun and how it works. The first thing is you need to unthread the barrel when you take these down. Now, I'm not going to take off the barrel, so I don't need to do that. But what you do is you lock it down, you got the flip down lever, pull the trigger, and then you can disassemble it. And then what you're going to see here are the typical, what you would see in like a Glock or any striker fired handgun these days, right? You're going to see the locking blocks, the striker mechanisms, etc. You're going to see the barrel. You're going to see the dual captured recoil spring, etc. All of which you can easily pop out. You need to unscrew this top here to remove the barrel back out of there, but it looks very similar to what you would see with, for example, a Glock. Now, the one thing I want to show you, like with the Glock 20, is just a quick comparison between the two so you can see kind of the differences. So again, this is the Glock Gen 4. Again, very similar type of inures that you would see on here. The Glock Gen 5, of course, is ambi, so it's going to be a little bit different, but again, very similar. One of the big differences you're going to notice, however, is the dual captured spring. On a Glock 20, at least on the Gen 4, it's actually pretty beefy here. You can see it size-wise compared to, for example, on the FN, which is considerably smaller. So that's one of the main differences between the two. A lot of people mess around with these recoil springs, especially if you're shooting larger, more powerful rounds out of your 10 millimeters. But I fired everything out of my FN and I've had zero problems. And interestingly enough, as you can tell, one of the main differences you're going to notice between the two, otherwise mechanically, it's all very similar to type of striker fire, but the recoil springs are a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is take a break here real quick and reassemble the handguns. Okay, now we've got both the handguns put together. I want to talk about some of the things that really set the FN apart from other guns in the marketplace. The first thing is looks. If you see one of these, the 510, the 545, they just look really cool. Even in black, they just, the lines, the contours to it are just very different than, for example, a typical Glock, right? A typical basic blocky Glock. It just is a very nice looking gun. The grips on these guns are incredible. Not only is the texture very good, but it just fits my hand perfectly, especially when I'm shooting larger loads, which again is something I had to compensate for example, my Glocks, where I had to build out for the grip frames and things of that nature. You don't have to do that. In my case, this came right out of the box feeling absolutely perfect, which is exactly what I want. Great grip angle, great texturing, and great feel and control, especially in shooting heavy loads that come back at you pretty hard. So far, it has been 100% reliable with all the ammo types that I put through the FN, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people have liked Glocks for a long time, is because I've always had 100% reliability with my Glocks as well. The FN is no different. I put everything through here, everything that I fire 10 millimeter wise, including my favorite loads, which are the Underwood 200 grain hard cast, which is what I carry outdoors a lot with me. So this is absolutely zero reliability issues. Not only is the gun really good, but I feel like it from the reliability side, the magazines are just really well constructed as well, leading to that 100% reliability problem. The accuracy of this gun is really good. Now, I'm going to show you a target where I shot freehand at 15 yards, the FN compared to my Glock using my Underwood ammo loads. And again, this is not a bench rest test. So everybody that wants to weigh in on this and say, well, it's not a bench rest and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I get it, but I don't really shoot a 10 millimeter outdoors bench resting it anyways, right? I'm usually shooting it freehand. So really what matters to me is how is the accuracy comparable for me shooting these two different types of handguns. So the first group at 15 yards came with the FN 510, and this is the type of group I got. The second group was my Glock 20, again freehand, and you can see the type of groups I got here. So comparatively, at least for me, the FN 510 is a little bit more accurate than I'm able to get out of the Glock 20. Now, this is again shooting iron sights, etc. But again, this is just for me. And is it accurate? Yeah, it's very accurate. In fact, it's a little bit more accurate, at least for me, than it is over a Glock 20. I would take either of those accuracies out of a 10 millimeter I'm shooting, but if it's a little bit more accurate, which is what I'm getting at it, that's what I'll take all day. Another thing I like about the 510, as I mentioned before, is it's the same exact size as a 545, which is the 45 ACP model. So if you're a big 45 ACP guy, or you really like 1911s and haven't really moved into the striker fire space or things like that, you might want to give these a look, give them a try. It's not, when you fire the 545, it's not as snappy as the 10 millimeter because it's not as powerful as a load, but it's really a fantastic handgun to shoot. Many people that shoot the 45 models say that it is the most comfortable 45 that they've ever fired. And of course, they come with magazines that hold up to 18 rounds. They protrude down a little bit farther, but they make a really good 45 ACP version of this handgun as well. And then the other thing that really sets it apart is the threaded barrel. And it can take suppressors, but threaded barrels, you don't have to have a suppressor to really make this stuff work. But if you do, these take the 5.78 by 28 threads. So these are the same threads that you use on a 45 ACP. So if you have a 45 ACP can or that size, you can run that on the 510. Now, you might be asking, well, why the hell would I even run a suppressor on a 10 millimeter? These rounds are much quicker, they're supersonic, etc. You can get a little bit better sound performance, but you're right, you're not going to fully get what you get, for example, out of a 45 ACP or something that's subsonic when you're shooting. It can, but it can muffle things a little bit if you want to shoot it that way. However, one of the variations you can do with this, and I know FN doesn't overtly talk about this and say you can do this, but for years, if you've owned a 10 millimeter like a Glock 20 or 29, I've been shooting 40 Smith & Wesson 180 grains out of them, which are subsonics, and I've been doing that very safely and effectively for years. Now, there's some people out there that say, well, you shouldn't really do that because it could damage the extractor, because a 10 millimeter is basically just a little bit longer version of the 40 Smith & Wesson. But the reality is this 40 Smith & Wesson was a cut down of the original 10 millimeter by the FBI. We're using the exact same bullet, but cutting down the case length. So what you're doing is you're basically putting in a shorter case length, but exact same diameter bullet into your handgun. And I've done that reliably on my Glocks and as well as my FN. I've been able to run these through here very effectively. Now, there's some people out there that are going to say, well, you shouldn't do that because over time you might end up damaging your extractor. I don't really do it that often anyways, and I haven't really seen the damage, but is it possible? Yes. Does FN recommend it? No. But the reality is many people that own 10 millimeters that want to shoot subsonic loads will oftentimes grab 180 grain 40 Smith & Wessons off the bench and shoot them, which is what I've done out of this. I put my Obsidian can on here and I've shot 180 grain 40 Smith & Wessons out of the same magazines and had zero problems shooting them out of this gun. And I don't do that often, so I'm not too worried about any potential extractor damage, but the reality is I keep my eye on it anyways, and it is a great option. And there are, for example, subsonic 10 millimeter loads that you can buy. There's not as prevalent, for example, as 40 Smith & Wesson 180 grains, but either way you do have that option. The other thing is if you don't even have a suppressor, maybe you're one of these people that like to shoot compensators on your gun. That's a lot of people now are shooting these compensators off their gun where basically it screws onto the threading here. And what you do is you have the ability to port up some of the gases to mitigate some of the recoil effects of the 10 millimeters. So if you're one of those people that likes to run a compensator on your handguns, then maybe this is something that might appeal to you as well, which is you can get one of these aftermarket compensators that you can screw on here as well. So you've got a lot of benefits of having a threaded barrel. The other thing I really like about the threaded barrel more than anything is the fact that with 10 millimeters, you want, especially with the high power loads that I shoot, you want as long a barrel as possible because you want to burn off as much of that powder within the barrel. Because if you're shooting shorter barrels with high powered 10 millimeter loads, you know what I'm talking about. You're going to see a large blast at the end, which is basically of that power that you're foregoing by not having a longer barrel. So even a smaller, longer barrel with the threaded off the end gives you a little bit more power out of a 10 millimeter, especially for the high power rounds that are out there. Now, I want to talk about real quickly comparisons because a lot of people that are looking at this probably have or would consider a Glock 20. And I want to show just some comparisons between the two size-wise. And I'm going to do this with the magazines in so you can see them. So just real quickly, side by side, if I line up the barrels exactly, you're going to notice that the barrel length is just a little bit longer on the FN than the Glock 20. Not much, but a little bit longer. Size-wise, they're about the same type of width, and height is almost identical as well. Of course, the grip is where Glocks really lack in. You're going to also notice, for example, that the trigger well is a little bit bigger on the FN than the Glocks. So if you're somebody who likes to shoot with, for example, gloves or things like that in cold weather areas, you might enjoy the shooting the FN more than you do the Glock. Now, this is a Glock Gen 4 model that I have here, but you can see just some of the differences there, etc. Now, I'm going to put that also compared to my Glock 29 just so you can see some size differences as well. Glock 29 is nothing more than a shortened version of the Glock 20. Again, shorter barrel as you would expect, about the same type of width, but it's the height that you really have a noticeable difference on. I have, of course, a pinky extension on here, but again, you can see some of the differences as well. A lot of people like carrying these as backups, etc., but again, you can get just a difference on the size so you can see the two side by side. Now, beyond the size of them, there's also one other in the market which I've reviewed before, which is the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 in 10 millimeter. And this is another option that people are looking at in the market as well. It has suppressor type sights, etc. Now, I've reviewed this before. It's a bit of a mixed bag when people buy these in the marketplace. Some people really like them. Some people find that their reliability is not as good. But when you look at them side by side, I just want to show you real quickly how they look. Again, very similar in width. Length, of course, you got suppressor length there, as well as the height is almost identical as well. And of course, it takes 15 round magazines. So it's a little bit more affordable, the M&P, and it's also a little bit lighter as well. So when you look at this, for example, empty with an empty magazine, it comes in at 1 pound, 11 ounces. So it's a little bit lighter than FN as well. But some of the feedback I've gotten, I've tried every round out of my 2.0, and I've had zero problems with it, including my 200 and 220 grain loads. But there have been a number of people I've talked to that have fired heavier loads for these and had reliability problems. So again, I'm not going to knock the Smith & Wesson. It's another good option in the marketplace, but apparently there seems to be some inconsistency in the reliability of that handgun. I've not had that experience myself, but other people have had, and I did want to share that. Now, as we talked about before, the barrel is just a little bit longer than a Glock 20. The grip angle is better. There's no ridiculous Glock hump. As I mentioned before, the FN is slightly more accurate, as we talked about. And then the cost of an FN is typically about $200 to $400 more than a Glock 20. And when I say $200 to $400 more, it depends on which version you buy. If you buy the base model, etc., where you're not going to get the features I talked about with the tactical, then it's a couple $100 more than a Glock. But again, you might have to make upgrades to the Glocks, like your sights, etc. It's $400 more when you get to the tactical level. So it really depends on the version that you have out there, etc. So what are some of my overall observations? Well, the FN basically comes in around $200 to $400 more than a Glock 20, depending upon the version that you buy. Where are some of the other things I would like to see? Over time, it would be nice if FN included a manual safety version. So if you're one of those people that wants a manual safety, that looks like it's coming, but it would be a nice feature to add. I love the feel and holding and shooting of this gun. It is out of the box, absolutely perfect for me compared to even my Glock 20 and others. Many people struggle to fire these accurately, especially if you have smaller to medium-sized hands or you're dealing with the Glock hump or things of that nature. So I don't have that problem with the FN. It just feels absolutely perfect. It requires no modification out of the box, which is very important, especially today when you're buying a handgun. I don't like to make a whole bunch of changes to a handgun that otherwise should have been made by the manufacturer, and I think FN really nailed it with this one. And then the final thing is the 10 millimeter. I really like the 10 millimeter because it can literally drop anything in the North American continent, which brings me to a quick topic about grizzly bears. Everybody, when they talk about 10 millimeters, are always like, well, I want a great gun for a grizzly bear, etc. I just want to remind everybody a couple things about grizzly bears. First off, there's really only 4 states that have a consistent grizzly bear population anymore in the United States. Hell, even California has a grizzly bear on their flag. The grizzly bear went extinct in California over 100 years ago. There's just not a lot of grizzly bears in the United States, and the potential for you to run into them is actually very low for most people. In fact, grizzly bear attacks are very rare in the United States. There's only about maybe 10 or 11 per year, and there's only maybe 1 to 3 fatalities around them. It's really, really low. I mean, you're more likely to get killed in your car driving to somewhere where you're going to go hike with the gun than you are running into a grizzly with the gun. The other thing is, I've talked to a number of people that do live in grizzly territory that have dealt with them before, and they've all told me the same thing, which is most grizzly attacks happen faster than you can react to. No matter if you carry a gun or not, if you have bear spray or not, the reality is if they're choosing to attack you, you're probably not going to know what happens until after it hit you. So that's just something to kind of share with you, because I think a lot of people get really fixated on, well, I want a 10 millimeter in case I get attacked by a bear, when the reality is many of these situations where people are running into and successfully protecting themselves against bears, like a grizzly bear or whatever, are oftentimes doing it with 12 gauge shotguns with Brennicky slugs and things like that, which is really what you want anyways, because all handguns, no matter what caliber carry, are really underpowered compared to a long gun. That's why, to me, handguns, I've said this many times, are always secondary or always a secondary gun to to a primary gun, which should be a rifle or a shotgun. And if you have the ability to defend yourself with a 12 gauge shotgun with some Brenner-key hardcast slugs like I use, I would take that all day over a handgun, because the reality is that's where you're going to be most successfully defending yourself, not with a handgun like this, especially when you're dealing with bear attacks and things like that. However, the one thing I did want to point out is I do spend a lot of time in the Colorado mountains. I have all my life. And the reality is there are a lot of black bears there. There's a lot of moose and mountain lions, etc. Black bears very easily scare off. They're usually just scavenging for food. You make a lot of noises or things, and generally they're never going to give you a problem. So people really shouldn't be that worried about that. In fact, the threats that we see in Colorado more often than not, especially in the areas that I go, are around from moose and mountain lions, because we see them a lot, especially moose. There's a lot of moose around the towns and the areas, etc. And in fact, in the town of Grand Lake a couple decades ago, a moose killed the mayor right in the main street of the town a couple decades ago. And if you've been around moose, you know that, especially in the fall when they get into the rut and things like that, they go crazy and they will literally attack and try to trample you to death. So the reality is, in the areas that I go, especially in Colorado, I'm more likely to run into a threat from a moose or a mountain lion than I am, for example, a bear. But the good news about a 10 millimeter is a 10 millimeter, again, with my favorite load, the 200 grain hard cast, I can basically handle any one of those threats. So I just want to kind of level set, because everybody seems to think they're going to run into a bear every time they go into the mountains, when the reality is, chances are you'll never probably ever see one in your life. If you do, it's probably only a black bear and they're going to be scared away from you, etc. And again, you're probably going to be more likely to run into problems, depending upon where you're at, from additional animals like a moose or a mountain lion than you would a bear. So again, that's why the versatility of a 10 millimeter comes into play. A lot of people throw up avatars, I do as well, of a bear, etc., around 10 millimeters, because everybody seems to fixate on that. Well, the reality is you're probably never going to deal with that, especially unless you live in Alaska or things like that. In those areas where they're highly concentrated, chances are you're never going to have to deal with that problem. Now, with that all being said, the 510, after all of my experience with them, is now my new woods weapon. It's the one I'm going to carry out for all threats that are there. I basically don't need now my Glock 20, and I never thought that day would come. If you watch my videos before, I've often said that if I had to give up all of my guns, one of the last guns I would ever give up would be my Glock 20. But that day has come. The reason why is I will grab this FN all day, every day over my Glock 20. And I never thought that day would come, so here we are. So congrats, FN. You now gave me a reason to get rid of the one gun that I said would be the last gun I would ever get rid of, and it has to do with this excellent handgun right here. So if you like 10 millimeters, if you like FNs, or even if you like 45 ACPs and looking at different options on the 545, these are fantastic. If you have a chance, pick one up, fire one. They are great, extremely reliable, beautiful handguns. And again, they have dethroned in my gun safe the Glock 20 as the go-to 10 millimeter handgun of choice moving forward. If you like this video or like our channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.